Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord, and welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Again, sorry for this one being late. We actually had some information transfer that was proving to be a bit of a problem. So that resulted in a bit of a delay for some translations, as well as some information I wanted to include on the slide. It's also harder to gather a bit of information due to the nature of Gradefest this time around, which doesn't cater to this banner. But today we will be talking about the Doll Up banner featuring PSSR 3 Tenka, SSSR 4 Sakuya, as well as the event PSR 4 Kaho. Starting things off, Tenka. Tenka 3, arrives on the scene at the least opportune time, really. A visually focused center with the visual appeal locked behind her 4-star unlock, paired with a dance vocal fest right after a vocal dance fest, means that her debut will be postponed until Visual's back in rotation. I don't know why they decided to not really throw a bone to Visual 2 seasons in a row, but it is what it is. She has strong appeals, lackluster passives, and a simple memory appeal. That's more or less the key points of this card. If you are one hoping for Visual Alstroemeria to take the stage, you're in luck, but be ready to make heavy investment. She's hard to build, and given the current state of Visual Alstroemeria, she might not even be your center, despite her memory. The roles for this unit are Nuker, Center, and Healer. Get your 4-star supports ready, or a few Hazuki uncaps, because you're gonna need the skills. Speaking of, her initial skill is a Vocal 3x appeal that applies a mental recovery of 5% at the start of every turn for the next 4 turns, and Link appeal of Vocal 3 that scales off of stamina. So in other words, the higher your health, the more damage it does. The 4-star version of this is a visual 4.5 appeal with a mental recovery of 10% at the start of every turn for 4 turns, and the Link is a visual 3 appeal. That also, again, scales on stamina. As for her passives, her 1-star passive is a visual 25% up if your HP is 75% or higher, has a 40% chance to activate 1 time. Her 2-star passive is a mental damage cut of 50% if it is turn 4 or earlier, 40% chance to activate 1 time max, a vocal 200 uncap, and her memory appeal at max is a visual 2.4 appeal that scales off of health, so max mental, and the Link appeal is a visual 1.2. So visual 3.6 on the memory appeal is quite strong. Overall, this card is okay. One of the discussion points I saw on forums and on a couple wikis was the discussion between comparing this card with Chiyuki 2. If you check out Chiyuki 2 on the wiki, you'll see that she's very similar, especially on their 4-star appeal. Chiyuki has a visual 4 with a visual 3 Link appeal that scales in the same way that Tenka's does. However, Chiyuki has a mental recovery of 20% immediately upon using the skill. And from what we've learned from information, this actually has some heavy implications as to how strong Chiyuki's appeal can be compared to Tenka's. If we just wanted to compare the appeals, which is a visual 4 and visual 3 versus Tenka's 4.5 and 3, so 7 versus 7.5, obviously at higher health Tenka does more damage. However, if Chiyuki's health is anywhere between 50% to 90%, she will do more damage than Tenka because that heal is instantaneous, meaning that between that 99 to 80% range, Chiyuki will technically always be at max HP, whereas Tenka will not be. So that scaling can actually hurt her a lot. And that also goes along with her memory appeal. Chiyuki's memory appeal at max has a recovery of 25% first, followed by a visual 2.5. That actually ends up being very useful and lets Chiyuki be stronger than Tenka with her memory appeal from anywhere between 30% HP to 80% HP. So if you find yourself really low on HP all the time, Tenka might not be the center for you. You might want to invest into Chiyuki 2. They're both expensive cards, but for reasons being that we'll talk about in just a second, Chiyuki might be the better center for now. As for the recommended supports, Visual Alstroemeria's biggest weakness is no access to supports that aren't named Tenka, especially in this case since of course we're producing Tenka. There's no synergy available. They really don't have any cards other than one to really help you out, and it's SR Chiyuki. If you plan on building this Tenka purely for visual, you will need an extra appeal from any 4-star support you have. So make careful assessment to decide what appeal that needs to be. As for vocal, do your best. I have some supports recommended here, and you can check them out on the wiki, which is linked in the description below. For teammates, I've condensed this down a little bit. I feel it's getting a little redundant because Chiyoko and Rinzai are such powerful staples on every team that from this point on, I'll just be recommending the core if you're focusing on a 3-piece unit. Because with 5 pieces, of course, there's a little more leeway and less leeway at the same time. So for 3-piece units like this, I'll kind of just let you pick what you want, but there's definitely some cards that work better or worse in certain teams. Anyway, there's really only 2 ideal options for this Tenka, as a center or a backup visual unit. You can also run her on a vocal focus Alstro, but depending on your investment into Tenka 1, who's a much stronger vocal unit, Tenka 3 might be less than ideal. So for visual Alstroemeria, I recommend for now Chiyuki 2 as the center, Amana 2 as presumably one of your backup damage units, and then Tenka 3. And for the other option listed below, that is more of a vocal focus Alstroemeria with Chiyuki at the center, and featuring Amana 1. Overall, I would grade the new Tenka an A-. The only reason that Tenka isn't an S unit is the lack of longevity that other Alstroemeria centers have in the current age, meaning it is reasonably harder to stay at 100% mental every run with this team as it stands. You don't have access to the limited units like limited Amana, limited Chiyuki, and especially limited Tenka if you use this card, which means that healing is much harder to come by. This is especially true if you choose not to use Amana 2, who can support you and give you some buffs alongside this card. As a unit, I would grade her an A. The recent Alstroemeria Limiteds have set a high bar for how their units tend to function. Tenka essentially is a unit that hits really hard, but that's about it. Her passives are mostly negligible. The heal is too slow to be useful for Alstroemeria right now. You will probably need it, but in terms of helping her do damage, it's not doing her any favors. So while her appeals are strong, the rest of her kit is so-so. Moving on, we have the support SSR, Prince Princess Sakuya Shirase. The latest permanent Sakuya support is a mixed bag of usefulness. If you look at this card in a vacuum of being completely maxed out, she has a lot of positives for Antika. Her biggest downfall is her overall lack of useful passives to include on teams, and will most likely be seen sparingly in visual Antika teams who want arguably one of the hardest hitting appeals that a permanent support can offer. Her support skills are solid, the rest can be debated. So below we can see she has Idol's Bond, Visual Mastery Mental, Promise Recovery, Rest Boost, and Unit Mastery Visual. And you can also see the necessary levels to upgrade these skills. Most notably, level 70 unlocks Visual Mastery Mental 10, and 75 upgrades Unit Mastery Visual up to 5. Which can actually be a lot. That's about 20 visual per room if you have every single Antika member in the room. The chances of that are slim, but it can be useful. But there are also problems. And we'll get into those now with her passives. Her 1-star passive is a visual 21% up if the unit has Sakuya active, has a 30% chance to activate 1 time. As a reminder, this means that Sakuya needs to be on the stage. She can't just be a support on the team. If you're running full Hokago and use this card, this buff will never activate. If you're using 4 Hokago cards and 1 Sakuya card on stage, then it can activate, just as an example. Her 2-star passive is a visual 50% up if the turn is 5 or later, has a 10% chance to activate 1 time. Her uncap is for visual, so it's a visual plus 100, and her appeal is a visual 0.6 to 3.0, that is the inverse of Tenka. It is a revenge skill, so the lower your HP, the more damage it does, and then follows up with an extra visual 2.0 appeal that scales on just standard visual stats. Overall, I would say this card is a B+ to an A. Her masteries are great, to a degree. There's actually a real problem there, and her passives don't help. The visual 50% that has a 10% chance to activate really late is bad. It's really bad. Even putting this on your leader doesn't make this passive very good. And the other problem is that because she has Visual Mastery Mental, which is where you probably want her to be to pair up with a visual card like Hot Pot Mamimi, you're earning a lot of health, which contradicts the idea of running a revenge skill that wants you to always be at low HP. Antika teams nowadays are actually working on getting optimized health to be lower per card. Rather than bog down their speed by bulking up on HP, they go for a more glass cannon build that tries to make the most of all of their revenge passives. So having a card that constantly buffs up your mental isn't exactly the best idea. You can tell that Wanderlust Mamimi has really placed a chokehold on permanent unit passive strength, as Sakuya's 2-star passive is criminally gimped, further pushing visual teams back. She has a 5.0 appeal if you're in critical health, but otherwise, stick to the initial Sakuya. She has a much better passive, just as useful of appeal, and very solid support skills. At least this card's good on Antika. Last but not least is the event SR, Madobe Silent Time, Kaho Komiya. Now, remember a long time ago, when Shiny blessed the Jury Peas with a Maid Jury event card? Now, remember how that card was kind of bad and contradicted Hokago's entire goal by giving up damage for attention down? Well, now you can relive that memory again with the new event Kaho, and it's just as bland as it sounds. To look at some positives, she's a free unit with a 2.5 and 3.5 appeal, and passives that are still relatively easy to activate in the current state of Gradefest. That being said, more or less every Kaho SR has a better use in teams than this Kaho, so consider this a free costume unlock for your other Kaho cards. Her rolls, or rather roll, is just a self-debuffer. For her skills, her initial skill is a Dance 2.5 appeal that applies an attention 20% up and increases incoming damage by 20% for 2 turns. And the Link appeal is an attention 30% down for 2 turns. The fully upgraded version of this skill becomes a visual 3.5 with attention 30% up and incoming damage increased by 30% for 2 turns, and has the same Link appeal, attention 30% down for 2 turns. For passives at 1 star, a visual 12% up if your mental is 75% or higher, 40% chance to activate 1 time. The 2-star passive is a visual 24% if it's turn 4 or later, 40% chance to activate 1 time, has a visual uncap of 50, and her memory peel at max is an attention 30% down for 3 turns and then applies a vocal 3 times appeal for the Link. Overall, these are okay. It's not really all that amazing. Mental damage up is common. It's not exactly the weirdest thing in the world for Hokago cards to reduce their defense and take more damage and be hit more often. And trying to counterbalance it with the Link skills is a bold idea, but ultimately doesn't lead to much, as evening things out doesn't really change the fact that you're still running a lot of high attention passives, and yeah, I don't highly recommend trying to use this card too seriously. There are other SR Kahos more than capable of being used seriously in the current state of the game, but you're welcome to try. For recommended supports, do what you can with supports to either go all in on attention down, such as the limited Mamimi or the event Kiriko, or ignore the gimmick and just give her strong appeals, like Dance Chiyoko or Dance Jury. As for alternatives, I just included some visual options, since I mostly included dance supports initially, so if you want to do a mixed build, having cards like those are appreciated. And yes, to get it out of the way, I really couldn't think of a team to recommend this time for this Kaho. There's not really a cohesive theme that the card really wants to work with, and there aren't exactly a whole lot of positives to necessarily work off of her. Overall, I would grade the card as a center, a C-. Kaho clearly isn't meant to be a center with this card, so don't even worry about it. And as a unit, B-. If Kaho didn't have a 3.5 appeal, she'd be an immediate C tier. Think of this event as an opportunity to get a nice alternate costume for other Kaho cards on your main screen or in production mode. That's about it. I kinda have the same feelings about Maid Jury if I ever have to go back and talk about that card. It's just a card that doesn't really work with the team it's meant to work with, and feels very, very lackluster and non-impactful. But a lot of event cards suffer from that fate, so Kaho isn't alone. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you everybody for watching, and feel free to share the video around and let people know what we're trying to do by sharing more information and knowledge about the Idolmaster Shiny Colors, especially for those who have been struggling with the game, or find the lack of knowledge disheartening when trying to learn. Next time we'll be talking about whatever banner comes up next. It looks like it'll be a rerun, so it might be nice to refresh myself on some of the older cards. Till then, I've been Cho, thanks for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.